Welcome to my study today. We're going to look at can and could, which are modal verbs. Modal verbs are sometimes called auxiliary verbs or even peculiar verbs because they behave in their own way. So we must first take a look at the set of rules applying to modal verbs, and then we'll look more closely at can and could. So let's get started. We can pair some of the modal verbs together, like can and could, may and might, shall and should, will and would, but some stand on their own, like must, ought, need and dare, and they behave in a special way, and we'll look at those in another video. So what's the first rule? Well, modal verbs are not used, and I must say here, except sometimes in the negative, to talk about things which are definitely happening or have definitely happened. Now this really means that they don't exactly have tenses like other verbs. It's difficult to use can and could to speak about the past and the future. For example, I can't swim, he could be at home. Now I'll explain that in the next slide. No third person S. He runs, she can, not she cans. Questions are made without do. Not do you can something, but can you, by reversing the order of the subject and the verb. They're followed by the infinitive of other verbs without to, except for ought, and ought will be looked at separately. You must come tomorrow, not you must to come. And ought, that ought to be enough. They're followed by not to make the negative, which we contract in speech to nt. You mustn't come tomorrow, I can't do it. They have no infinitives, no to something. They have other expressions instead. I'd like to be able to play the piano, not I'd like to can play, and the able to expression does cause a lot of trouble. No past forms, but some cases we have to say could and would can be used as past forms. After waiting an hour, we managed to catch a bus. Notice I've substituted a phrase there, we managed to, not could. Modal verbs are used with perfect infinitives to talk about things which did not happen or which we are not sure about in the past. Now that sounds complicated, but it's not really. You should have told me yesterday, but you didn't. In other words, it didn't happen. Now let's look at can and could in detail. Can is used to show you have the ability to do something, and it's rather timeless. It's not particularly talking about now or the future or the past. It's really concentrating on this ability. So she says, I can play the piano. And notice here that the can is rather a weak form. I can play the piano. She is saying she is able to play the piano. With the negative form, the not follows the can. I can't speak Spanish. Can you ride a horse? The question form reverses the verb and the subject. And again, it's a weak form here. Can you? Can you ride a horse? And the answer in this case is, of course I can. And the can is rather stressed. Of course I can. We can use could to refer to an ability in the past. I could play the piano when I was a kid, but now I've forgotten how to. Well, you may well ask, what's the difference between could and used to play? Well, if we remember, used to is used for a repeated action in the past, and if we add a time, we can see why. I used to play on Saturdays. But when he says he could play the piano when he was a kid, he's talking about just the ability. There is really no time involved with the could. You can, of course, use wasn't able to refer to the past. But it's a little bit difficult to say sometimes, so we're quite happy here to say I couldn't speak Spanish when I was a kid, which is almost using it like a past tense, but we have to remember that modal verbs don't have past tenses. I couldn't speak Spanish when I was a kid. And if you want to stress something, then you can use was able to. Even when I was a kid, I was able to ride a horse. This really stresses the ability in the past. Both can and could can be used in the question form. One is slightly more polite than the other. Can you close the door, please? Now, I might say that if I'm feeling a bit irritated. Can you close the door? It's very cold in here. But to be more polite, I would say, could you close the door, please? Can and could are about equal in this next example. Can I have these, please? Could I have these, please? About equal. And on the telephone, I think we would prefer could. Could I speak to John, please? Here's a situation where I can't use could to express a past event. It's one fixed event in the past. Imagine there's a bus, there's a car, there was going to be an accident. I would have to say there wasn't an accident because the bus was able to stop. I can't say because the bus could stop. I have to change it to was able to. And here's a similar situation, but this is a continuous action in the past. We were able to continue watching the film after the power came back on. I can't say we could continue because the action is continuous in the past. We have to change it to the were able to phrase. Of course, the opposite of to be able to is to be unable to. Look at this situation. They bought a car last week. Previously, it had been impossible to get a loan. Now, I could express that like this. They bought a car last week. Previously, they had been unable to. Now, remember that I said we could, in this case, substitute couldn't. That seems rather strange, but we can do it. They bought a car last week. Previously, they couldn't get a loan. For a future event, we need a future version of was able to. Look at this example. This time next week, that's obviously the future, we shall be able to move into our new house. It's kind of an eventuality, and we can use we shall be able to. You can use could if you use a conditional sentence like this. We could move in if the builders have finished. Or I can turn that around. If the builders have finished, we could move in. But that then becomes a conditional possibility, and that's slightly different. Here are two other phrases that we use instead of could. Managed to and succeeded in. He was able to climb the mountain because he had a long rope. He managed to climb the mountain. He succeeded in climbing. We can't use could here, and the reason is this. Could, as we keep saying, means he possessed the ability to do something, not achieved something by use of the ability. Look at these two sentences. The thieves were able to, or managed to, get into the house in spite of the locked doors. Now with the negative, the thieves couldn't get into the house last night because the doors were locked. I hope that does explain the differences between could and these three other expressions. Now here are some examples and questions for you to try for yourselves. Pause the video and work through the exercises. The answers follow. Next time we shall have a look at the modal verbs must and need. So, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe below. And I'll see you next time. Bye!